The stagecoach lurched to a violent halt in the middle of nowhere, snow already piling so thick against the windows that Clara Reynolds could barely see through the frosted glass, and her heart hammered with the terrifying realization that she might die before ever meeting the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry. The driver's muffled shout came through the howling wind, something about the horses refusing to go further, about conditions being too dangerous. Clara pressed her gloved hand against the window, trying to see anything beyond the wall of white that surrounded them. She'd left Boston 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 trunks and a photograph of Samuel Crawford, the rancher who'd answered her advertisement with surprisingly gentle letters that spoke of lonely Nevada nights and a home that needed a woman's touch. Now she wondered if she'd ever see that home, or if she'd become another cautionary tale whispered in boarding houses about foolish women who trusted strangers and died for their desperation. The stagecoach door flew open, bringing with it a blast of wind so cold it stole her breath. The driver's weathered face appeared, snow clinging to his beard. "Miss Reynolds, we can't go on. We're still 5 miles from Cherry Creek, and this blizzard's only getting worse. We'll have to wait it out here." "Here?" Clara looked around the cramped interior, already feeling the cold seeping through her traveling coat. For how long? Could be hours, could be days. He didn't meet her eyes. "I've got some blankets, but I won't lie to you, miss. This is bad, real bad. I've been driving this route for 15 years, and I've never seen a storm come up this fast in November." Clara's hands trembled as she pulled her coat tighter. She'd survived her parents' deaths, survived the shame of losing her teaching position, when the school decided a 22-year-old unmarried woman was too much temptation for the older boys, survived the slow descent into poverty that had finally driven her to answer advertisements from Western men seeking wives. She refused to die now, not when she'd finally found a chance at a new life. "Is there no shelter nearby, a ranch or a way station?" The driver shook his head. "Nothing between here and town, miss. I'm sorry. If I'd known this storm was coming, I'd never have left Reno this morning." He closed the door, sealing her back into the dim interior, and Clara wrapped her arms around herself, trying not to cry. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry anymore, not after leaving Boston, not after making the decision to become a mail-order bride. Tears were for women who had the luxury of emotions. She needed to be practical, strong, capable. That's what she'd promised Samuel in her letters. The wind screamed around the coach, and she could feel it rocking slightly on its springs. Snow piled higher against the windows until even the gray daylight disappeared. Clara pulled one of the thin blankets the driver had left around her shoulders and tried to remember Samuel's letters. The careful way he'd described his ranch and his life. He'd been honest with her, more honest than she'd expected. He'd told her about the isolation, about the hard work, about the long winters and the way the wind never stopped blowing across the Nevada plains. But he'd also written about the beauty of sunrises over the mountains, about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands, about wanting someone to share it all with. His letters had been awkward but sincere, and she'd found herself looking forward to them more than she'd expected. She wondered if he knew she was supposed to arrive today, wondered if he was waiting at the station in Cherry Creek, watching the storm and worrying. Or maybe he'd be relieved if she never arrived. Maybe he'd had second thoughts about bringing a city-bred Boston woman to his ranch. Time passed in a blur of cold and growing darkness. Clara couldn't tell if it had been 1 hour or 3. Her fingers were numb despite her gloves, and she couldn't stop shivering. She tried to stay awake, tried to keep moving to generate warmth, but exhaustion from weeks of travel weighed on her like stones. She must have dozed off because she jerked awake to the sound of voices outside, male voices, shouting over the wind. The door flew open again, and this time it wasn't the driver's face she saw, but a stranger's, half hidden beneath a snow-covered hat and scarf. "Miss Reynolds?" The voice was deep, rough with cold and urgency. "Are you Clara Reynolds?" "Yes." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Who are you?" "Samuel Crawford. I'm taking you to town." Clara's heart lurched. This was the man she'd come to marry. She couldn't see his face, couldn't see anything but his eyes and the gap between his hat and scarf, but those eyes were intense, a pale blue-gray that seemed to glow in the darkness. "The driver said it was impossible," she managed. "Too dangerous." "It is dangerous." Samuel reached into the coach, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her to her feet. Her legs were stiff with cold, and she stumbled. He caught her easily, steadying her. "But staying here is more dangerous. This coach won't protect you if the storm gets worse, and it's going to get worse. Can you walk?" "I think so. Your trunks will have to stay. I brought one horse, and it'll be hard enough getting us both to town." Clara didn't argue. She didn't care about the trunks, about the few possessions she'd brought from her old life. She just wanted to survive. Samuel wrapped another blanket around her, then lifted her out of the coach as if she weighed nothing. The wind hit her like a physical blow, and she gasped, burying her face against his shoulder. The world was nothing but white and howling chaos. She couldn't see the ground beneath her feet, couldn't see anything beyond Samuel's solid form. He carried her through snow that was already knee-deep, his movements sure despite the conditions. She felt him lift her onto a horse, felt the animal shifting nervously beneath her. Samuel mounted behind her, one arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Hold on to me," he said against her ear, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Don't let go, no matter what." Clara gripped his arm with both hands, and then they were moving. The horse pushed through the snow, and she could feel Samuel guiding it, his body tense with concentration. She'd never been this close to a man before, pressed against him in a way that would have scandalized her former neighbors in Boston. But nothing about this situation was proper or normal. This was survival, raw and desperate. The cold was unlike anything she'd experienced. It burned her exposed skin, found its way through every gap in her clothing. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasted blood. Samuel's arm tightened around her, sharing what little warmth he had. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me about Boston." It took her a moment to understand why he was asking. He wanted to keep her conscious, keep her mind working. "It's nothing like this," she said, her words slurred with cold. "We get snow, but not like this." "What did you do there?" "I was a teacher at a girls' school." She paused, trying to gather her scattered thoughts. "I taught literature and history." "Why'd you leave?" The truth seemed unimportant now, lost in the storm. "I lost my position. My parents died a year ago, and without their support, I couldn't afford to stay." She shivered violently. "I had nothing left there." Samuel's arm tightened fractionally. "You have something here now." They fell silent, all energy focused on enduring. Clara lost track of time again, lost track of everything except the cold and the movement of the horse and Samuel's steady presence behind her. She felt herself fading, her thoughts growing fuzzy. "Clara!" Samuel's voice cut through the fog. "Stay awake. We're almost there. 5 more minutes. You can do 5 more minutes." She tried to answer, but couldn't form words. Her body felt heavy, disconnected. She heard Samuel curse, felt him pull her closer, one hand rubbing her arm roughly, trying to restore circulation. Then suddenly there were lights, faint gold blurs in the white darkness, voices calling out. The horse stopped, and Samuel was lifting her down, carrying her again. Warmth hit her face, shocking after the cold, and she realized they were inside somewhere. "Get Doc Harrison," Samuel was saying, "and tell Mrs. Peterson I need her." Clara was lowered onto something soft, a bed or couch. People moved around her, speaking in urgent tones she couldn't quite follow. Hands removed her wet coat, her boots, wrapped her in warm blankets. Someone held a cup to her lips, and hot liquid burned its way down her throat, making her cough. Gradually, painfully, sensation returned to her body. With it came clarity. She was in a small room, a stove blazing in the corner, several people hovering nearby. A gray-haired woman was chafing her hands, and an older man with a doctor's bag was checking her pulse. "You'll be fine, young lady," the doctor said kindly. "Mild frostbite on your fingers and toes, but nothing serious. You were lucky Samuel found you when he did." Clara turned her head, searching for the man who'd saved her. He stood near the window, his back to the room, still wearing his snow-covered coat. Now that she could actually see him, she realized he was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He looked like he belonged in this harsh land, carved from the same granite as the mountains. "Mr. Crawford?" she said, her voice hoarse. He turned, and for the first time she saw his face fully. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, those striking blue-gray eyes, met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're awake," he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "How do you feel?" "Cold, but alive, thanks to you." She tried to sit up, but the woman pushed her gently back down. "You rest, dear," the woman said. "I'm Martha Peterson. This is my boarding house. You'll stay here tonight, get properly warm and fed." "But I thought—" Clara looked at Samuel, confused. "I thought I was coming to your ranch." "You were. You will." Samuel removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in what she'd come to recognize as a nervous gesture. "But the ranch is another hour's ride in good weather. I barely made it to town with you. We'll wait until the storm passes." "How did you even know to look for me?" "The station master sent word that your stage left Reno this morning. When the storm hit early afternoon and you hadn't arrived, I knew something was wrong." His jaw tightened. "I should have ridden out sooner." "You saved my life," Clara said quietly. "That's what matters." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger she'd agreed to marry based on letters and a photograph, had risked his life to bring her to safety. He'd carried her through a blizzard when he could have stayed safe in town. The doctor cleared his throat. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Reynolds. Rest now." He and Mrs. Peterson moved toward the door, leaving Clara alone with Samuel. He stayed by the bed, shifting his weight uncertainly. "I should let you rest too." "Wait." Clara reached out instinctively, then pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of the impropriety. "I want to thank you properly. What you did, riding out in that storm, it was incredibly brave. It was necessary." His voice was gruff. "I brought you here. I'm responsible for you." "Is that why you came for me? Responsibility?" Samuel's eyes searched hers, and she saw something warm flicker in their depths. "I came because the thought of you dying out there, before I even got to meet you properly, was unbearable." The honesty in his words stole her breath. "You don't even know me. I know your letters. I know you're brave enough to leave everything familiar and come to a place you've never seen, to marry a man you've never met. I know you're smart and kind and stronger than you probably realize." He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. "And now I know you're stubborn enough to survive a blizzard." Clara laughed weakly. "I didn't have much choice in surviving. You held on. You stayed conscious when a lot of people would have given up." The smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "Clara, I want you to know, you don't have to marry me right away. Take some time, get to know me, see if this is really what you want. You're not trapped here." The offer surprised her. Most mail-order bride arrangements didn't include such consideration. Men wanted wives quickly, practical partnerships to ease the burdens of frontier life. But Samuel was offering her a choice, freedom she hadn't expected. "What if I decide this isn't what I want?" she asked carefully. Pain flickered across his face, but he masked it quickly. "Then I'll pay your passage wherever you want to go, back to Boston or somewhere else entirely." "That's very generous." "It's decent." He settled his hat back on his head. "You rest now. I'll be at the boarding house tomorrow to check on you, and we can talk more when you're recovered." He left before she could respond, and Clara lay back against the pillows, exhausted but too stirred up to sleep. Through the window, she could still hear the wind howling, snow pelting the glass. The storm raged on, but she was safe and warm, saved by a man who seemed to be nothing like what she'd expected. Samuel Crawford had sounded practical in his letters, straightforward and simple. But the man who'd carried her through a blizzard, who'd offered her freedom even though he'd paid for her passage and clearly wanted a wife, was far more complex than his letters had suggested. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something other than fear or desperation. She felt curious. She wanted to know this man, understand what lay beneath his gruff exterior, and that curiosity, she realized, might be the most dangerous thing she'd felt in years. Morning brought silence. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the window, the storm finally exhausted. She sat up slowly, her body aching, but her mind clear. Mrs. Peterson bustled in with breakfast on a tray. "The storm broke just before dawn," the older woman said cheerfully, setting the tray across Clara's lap. "The whole town's digging out now. Samuel was here earlier asking after you, but I told him to let you sleep." "What time is it?" "Nearly 10. You slept 14 hours, dear. Your body needed it." Mrs. Peterson settled into a chair by the bed. "Now eat up. You need your strength." Clara obeyed, discovering she was ravenous. The food was simple but delicious: eggs and bacon and fresh bread with butter. As she ate, Mrs. Peterson chatted about the town, about the unusually early blizzard, about Samuel. "He's a good man," she said. "Lost his parents 5 years ago to the fever. Been running that ranch alone ever since. It's a hard life for a man by himself, but he's made a success of it. Has nearly 200 head of cattle now, good grazing land, a solid house." "You've known him long?" "Since he was a boy. His father bought that land when Samuel was just 10. Brought the family out from Missouri. Samuel was always responsible, always helping his parents, but after they died, he changed, got quieter, more serious. He works too hard, spends too much time alone. Mrs. Peterson studied Clara with knowing eyes. He needs someone to remind him there's more to life than work. That's a lot of responsibility to put on a wife he doesn't know. Maybe, but I think you're up to it. The older woman stood, collecting the empty tray. The doctor will be by soon to check on you. Samuel said he'd come this afternoon if you're feeling well enough for visitors. After Mrs. Peterson left, Clara got out of bed and examined herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. She looked terrible, her face pale and her hair a tangled mess, dark circles under her green eyes. Her fingers and toes were tender from the frostbite, but the doctor had been right. The damage was minimal. She washed as best she could with the water in the basin and tried to tame her auburn hair into some semblance of order. Her traveling dress was ruined, stained and wrinkled beyond saving, but it was all she had. Everything else had been in the trunks left behind at the stagecoach. The doctor's visit was brief. He pronounced her recovered enough to move around, but warned her to take it easy for a few more days. Clara spent the rest of the morning staring out the window at Cherry Creek, her new home. The town was smaller than she'd expected. Maybe 24 buildings clustered along a single main street. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks white with snow that probably wouldn't melt until spring. The landscape was beautiful, but harsh, so different from Boston's civilized streets and green parks. Samuel arrived at 2 o'clock, bringing with him a package wrapped in brown paper. He looked different in daylight, younger somehow, though no less serious. He'd cleaned up, shaved, combed his dark hair back from his face. He was handsome, Clara realized with a start. Not in a refined way, but in the rugged manner of men who spent their lives outdoors. "How are you feeling?" he asked, standing awkwardly just inside the room. "Much better. Please, sit down." She gestured to the chair Mrs. Peterson had vacated. "You don't have to hover by the door like a stranger." He sat, placing the package on the table. "I brought you something. It's not much, but I figured you'd need clothes since your trunks are still out there." Clara unwrapped the package carefully, finding a simple dress in dark blue cotton, practical but well made. There were also undergarments, stockings, and a warm shawl. She felt tears prick her eyes at the thoughtfulness. "This is too much," she said. "You've already done so much for me. It's practical. You can't wear that traveling dress forever." He shifted in the chair. "Mrs. Peterson helped me pick them out. I'm not much good at women's things." "They're perfect. Thank you." Silence fell between them, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Clara studied him openly, and he met her gaze with equal curiosity. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Clara began, "about not having to marry you right away." Samuel's expression became carefully neutral. "Have you made a decision?" "Not yet. But I'd like to learn more about you, about what my life would be like here." She folded her hands in her lap. "Your letters told me about your ranch and your work, but not much about you as a person. What do you want to know? Everything. What you like. What you want from life. Why you decided to seek a mail-order bride instead of courting someone local." Samuel leaned back in the chair, considering. "There aren't many unmarried women in Cherry Creek. The few who are here have known me since I was a boy, and none of us ever felt that spark, you know. We're friends, neighbors, but nothing more." Clara nodded, understanding. "And what do you like? What do you do when you're not working?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I don't have much time that's not work. Ranching isn't a job that ends at sunset. But I like reading when I can. I've got a small library at the house, books my mother collected. And I like writing early in the morning, before the day gets started, when everything's quiet and the world feels new." "What kind of books?" "Practical stuff, mostly. Agricultural journals, history. But my mother loved poetry, and I've read through her collection. Wordsworth, Whitman, some Byron." This surprised Clara. She'd expected a rancher to have little use for poetry. "Do you have a favorite?" Samuel looked almost embarrassed. "There's a Whitman poem my mother used to read, Song of Myself. I don't understand all of it, but some parts feel true, like when he talks about observing the grass and the stars and finding meaning there." Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. This man who'd seemed so rough and practical quoted Whitman and found meaning in grass and stars. "I taught that poem to my students. It's beautiful." "Your turn," Samuel said. "Tell me something about you that wasn't in your letters." Clara hesitated. She'd been careful in her letters, presenting herself as capable and practical, hiding her fears and doubts. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Not of you specifically, but of this whole situation. I've never done anything this reckless in my life. I was always the responsible one, the sensible daughter who did everything right. And then I lost everything anyway, and I realized being sensible hadn't protected me at all. So you did something reckless. I answered your advertisement." She met his eyes. "And now I'm sitting in a boarding house in Nevada, talking to a man I'm supposed to marry, and I have no idea if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life or the best decision." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. "I can't promise this will be easy. Ranching is hard work, and the winters are long and lonely. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles away, and town is an hour's ride. You'll spend a lot of time by yourself while I'm working the land, but I can promise I'll treat you with respect. I'll work hard to provide for you, and I'll do my best to make you happy." "What about love?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. "Do you believe in it?" "I believe in partnership. I believe 2 people can build something good together if they're both committed." He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I don't know if I believe in love at first sight or romantic destiny, but I believe caring can grow between 2 people if they're patient with each other." It was an honest answer, maybe more honest than Clara had expected. She appreciated that he didn't make promises he couldn't keep, didn't try to sweep her away with romantic declarations. "I'd like to see your ranch," she said, "before I make my decision." Samuel's face brightened. "The road should be clear enough tomorrow. I'll come get you in the morning, show you around." They talked for another hour, easier now that they had established some understanding. Samuel told her about the ranch, about his neighbors, about the rhythm of life in Cherry Creek. Clara told him about Boston, about teaching, about the books she loved and the life she'd left behind. By the time he left, Clara felt like she was beginning to understand the man she'd traveled so far to meet. That night, she lay awake thinking about choices and chances. She could still leave, could ask Samuel to send her somewhere else. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, no prospects. And more than that, she realized she didn't want to leave. Something about Samuel Crawford called to her. Something about his quiet strength and unexpected depth. She wanted to know him better. Wanted to see if the partnership he spoke of could become something more. Morning came bright and cold. Clara dressed in the new clothes Samuel had brought, surprised by how well they fit. Mrs. Peterson helped her with her hair, braiding it and pinning it up in a practical style. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said. "Samuel's a lucky man." "I haven't agreed to marry him yet." "You will." Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "I see the way you look at him and the way he looks at you. That's not duty or practicality. That's the beginning of something real." Samuel arrived with a wagon instead of a horse, the bed filled with clean hay and blankets. "Thought you'd be more comfortable this way," he explained, helping Clara up onto the seat beside him. The road out of town had been cleared, though snow still lay deep on either side. The landscape was stunning in the morning light, endless white broken by dark pines and rocky outcroppings. Clara had never seen so much open space, so much sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until you see it in spring," Samuel said. "Everything turns green, and wildflowers cover the meadows. It's like the whole world's coming alive." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady plod of the horses. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they passed, a creek that ran year-round, a grove of aspens that turned gold in autumn, the boundary markers of his property. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a thin line of smoke on the horizon, then as buildings taking shape against the mountains. The house was larger than Clara had expected, a solid two-story structure built from logs, with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Nearby stood a barn, several smaller outbuildings, and corrals where horses stood watching their approach. Samuel helped Clara down from the wagon and led her toward the house. "It's not fancy," he said, almost apologetically, "but it's sturdy, warm in winter, cool in summer." He opened the door, and Clara stepped into a large room that served as kitchen and living space. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows let in plenty of light. The furniture was simple but well made, everything clean and orderly. It felt like a home, not just a shelter. "Upstairs are 3 bedrooms," Samuel said. "The master bedroom is the largest. The others are smaller but comfortable, and there's a root cellar out back for storage." Clara moved through the space slowly, taking everything in. She could see evidence of Samuel's mother everywhere, in the curtains at the windows, in the bookshelf filled with volumes, in the small touches that made the house feel lived in, rather than just occupied. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. "You've maintained it beautifully." "I try. It's what my mother would have wanted." Samuel moved to the fireplace, stirring up the banked coals and adding more wood. "Are you hungry? I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage." They ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese and preserved vegetables from the root cellar. As they ate, Samuel told her more about the ranch, about his daily routine, about his plans to expand the herd in the spring. Clara listened, watching him come alive as he talked about his work. This was a man who loved what he did, who'd found purpose in building something with his own hands. After lunch, Samuel showed her the rest of the property. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and horses. He introduced her to each animal, telling her their names and personalities as if they were people. Clara found herself charmed by his obvious affection for the creatures in his care. "Do you ride?" Samuel asked. "Not well. I had a few lessons as a girl, but nothing serious." "I could teach you if you stay. It's important out here to be able to ride. The distances are too far to walk." "If I stay?" Clara repeated. She turned to face him fully. "Samuel, I need to ask you something honestly, and I need an honest answer." "All right. If I agree to marry you, what would you expect from me? Not just in terms of work, but in terms of us, our relationship." Samuel met her gaze steadily. "I'd expect honesty, communication. I'd expect you to tell me if something's wrong, if you're unhappy, if you need something. I'd expect you to be a partner, not just someone who keeps house." He paused, his cheeks coloring slightly. "As for the other aspects of marriage, I'd never force anything. We'd move at whatever pace felt right for both of us." The sensitivity in his answer moved her. "You've thought about this a lot." "I've had a lot of time to think over the past few months, waiting for your arrival." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his gray eyes. "Clara, I'm not going to pretend this is some grand love story. We barely know each other, but I feel something when I'm with you. Something I didn't expect. You're different from what I imagined. Braver, smarter, more interesting. And I think if we gave this a real chance, we could build something good together." Clara's heart was pounding. She'd come west expecting a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience. But standing in this barn, looking into Samuel's earnest face, she felt the stirrings of something that might become much more than convenience. "I'll marry you," she said quietly, "but I have conditions." Samuel's expression brightened, then became serious again. "Name them." "I want to keep learning. I want books, newspapers, connection to the world beyond this ranch. I want to feel like I'm growing, not just surviving." "Done. I'll take you to town as often as you want, get you whatever books and papers you need. And I want honesty between us, always, even when it's hard." "Agreed. And I want time. Time to get to know you before we share a bedroom. I know that's not typical, but I need it." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's fair. We'll take whatever time you need." Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Then yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Crawford." The smile that spread across his face was worth every risk she'd taken, every mile she'd traveled. He reached out tentatively and took her hand, his palm rough with calluses, but his touch gentle. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't regret this." They were married 3 days later, in a small ceremony at the town church. Mrs. Peterson and her husband stood as witnesses, along with Doc Harrison and a few of Samuel's neighbors who'd braved the snow to attend. Clara wore a simple dress Mrs. Peterson had helped her sew from fabric purchased at the general store, and Samuel wore his Sunday best, his dark hair slicked back, looking both nervous and happy. The ceremony was brief, the preacher's words washing over Clara in a blur. She repeated her vows clearly, watching Samuel's face as he repeated his. When the preacher pronounced them married, Samuel kissed her chastely on the cheek, and Clara felt the finality of what she'd done settle over her like a cloak. She was Clara Crawford now, wife of a Nevada rancher, resident of Cherry Creek. There was no going back. The reception was held at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, the townspeople bringing food and well wishes. Clara met more people in 3 hours than she'd met in her entire time in town, a blur of names and faces. Everyone was kind, welcoming, curious about the woman Samuel had brought all the way from Boston. As evening fell, Samuel drove them back to the ranch in the wagon, Clara sitting close beside him for warmth. The sky was clear for the first time since her arrival, stars blazing overhead in a way she'd never seen in Boston. "I've never seen so many stars," she said, tilting her head back to take them all in. "There's no city lights to dim them out here. On really clear nights, you can see the Milky Way stretching across the whole sky." Samuel glanced at her. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But not of you, just of everything being so new, so permanent. Nothing's permanent if you don't want it to be. Remember, you can change your mind." "I don't want to change my mind." Clara surprised herself with how much she meant it. "I want to make this work." At the ranch, Samuel carried her bags upstairs and showed her to one of the smaller bedrooms. "This can be yours for as long as you need it," he said, setting the bags down. "The master bedroom is across the hall if you need anything." Clara touched his arm, stopping him as he turned to leave. "Thank you for being patient with me. I meant what I said in my vows. I'll honor you, Clara. That means respecting your needs and your pace." He left her alone, and Clara sat on the narrow bed, looking around at what was now her room. She'd done it. She'd actually married a stranger and moved to the middle of nowhere. The magnitude of it should have terrified her, but instead, she felt oddly calm. She'd made a choice, taken control of her life in a way she never had before. Whatever came next, at least it would be on her own terms. The days settled into a rhythm. Samuel was up before dawn, tending to animals and ranch work. Clara woke early too, unused to the silence and the vast empty spaces. She learned to cook on the massive iron stove, to bake bread, and prepare meals from the supplies in the root cellar. Samuel ate everything she made without complaint, even when she burned things or overseasoned them. In the afternoons, when the worst of his work was done, Samuel taught her to ride. They started with the gentlest horse in his string, a mare named Daisy, who plodded along patiently while Clara learned to find her balance. Samuel was a patient teacher, never getting frustrated when she made mistakes, always encouraging. "You're a natural," he told her one afternoon, as she successfully guided Daisy around the corral. "Another few weeks and you'll be racing me." "I doubt that," Clara laughed, but she was pleased. She'd never expected to enjoy riding, but there was something freeing about it, about the connection with the animal and the sense of movement. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked or read quietly side by side. Clara discovered Samuel had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh unexpectedly. He discovered she had strong opinions on everything from literature to politics, and he seemed to enjoy debating with her even when they disagreed. "You're not what I expected," Samuel told her one night, looking up from the agricultural journal he'd been reading. "What did you expect?" "Someone more docile, I suppose. More willing to just accept things without questioning." Clara set down her book. "Would you prefer that?" "God, no." Samuel's smile was genuine. "I like that you challenge me, make me think about things differently. It keeps life interesting." They were growing closer, Clara realized. What had started as awkward politeness was becoming genuine friendship. She found herself looking forward to meals with him, to their evening conversations, to the small touches that were becoming more frequent. A hand on her back as he passed, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her something. But she also felt the tension growing between them, the awareness of their married state and the unconsummated nature of it. Sometimes she caught Samuel looking at her with something more than friendship in his eyes, something heated that made her pulse race. And sometimes she found herself wondering what it would be like to cross the hall at night, to knock on his bedroom door. 3 weeks after their wedding, a warm spell hit, melting the snow and turning the roads to mud. Samuel announced he needed to ride out to check on his cattle, scattered across his grazing land. "I'll be gone most of the day," he said over breakfast. "Will you be all right here alone?" "I'll be fine. I have plenty to keep me busy." Clara had been planning to do a thorough cleaning of the house, organizing and learning where everything was kept. Samuel hesitated at the door, then came back and kissed her forehead quickly, almost shyly. "Be safe." It was the most intimate gesture he'd made since their wedding day kiss, and Clara felt its effects long after he'd ridden away. She went about her work in a daze, scrubbing floors and washing windows while her mind churned with thoughts of her husband. She'd been so focused on practical matters, on adjusting to ranch life and learning new skills, that she hadn't let herself think much about the emotional aspects of her marriage. But now, alone in the house Samuel had built with his father, surrounded by evidence of the life he'd created, she found herself confronting the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with her husband. It wasn't the dramatic, sweep-you-off-your-feet love of novels. It was quieter, steadier, built from shared meals and patient lessons and late-night conversations. It was in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way he listened when she talked about things that mattered to her, the way he'd risked his life in a blizzard to save a woman he'd never met. Samuel Crawford was a good man, and Clara wanted their marriage to be more than a practical partnership. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Samuel returned at dusk, cold and tired, but satisfied. Clara had dinner waiting, beef stew and fresh bread, and she watched him eat with new eyes, seeing him not just as her husband in name, but as the man she wanted in every sense. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Clara found her courage. "Samuel, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy with how things are between us?" He set down the harness he'd been mending and looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean our arrangement, the separate bedrooms, the distance we're keeping." Clara's heart hammered, but she pushed forward. "Are you content with that?" Samuel's expression became guarded. "I told you we'd move at your pace. If you're not ready, I'm not going to push." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you're happy." He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I'm not happy with the distance, but I'm trying to be patient because I know you need time." "What if I don't need more time?" Samuel's eyes locked on hers, intense and searching. "Clara, I need you to be sure. I don't want you to feel obligated or rushed. This is too important." Clara stood and crossed to where he sat, her legs trembling but her resolve firm. She knelt beside his chair, taking his hand in both of hers. "I'm sure. I didn't expect this, Samuel. I came here thinking this would be a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience. But it's become more than that. You've become more than that. Clara." Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. He cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I've been falling for you since the moment you opened your eyes in that boarding house, and thank me for saving you. I tried to keep my distance, tried to give you space, but every day it gets harder." "Then stop trying," Clara whispered. He kissed her then, not the chaste kiss of their wedding, but something real and deep and full of longing. Clara melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked one more time. "I've never been more certain of anything." He stood, pulling her up with him, and led her up the stairs. At the landing, he paused. "Your room or mine?" "Ours," Clara said. "The master bedroom. No more separation." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was radiant. He swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of the master bedroom, just as he'd carried her through the blizzard, but this time toward warmth and intimacy, instead of away from death. They came together slowly, tenderly, taking time to learn each other. Samuel was gentle, patient, making sure Clara felt safe and cherished. She'd been nervous, her only knowledge of marital relations coming from whispered gossip and vague warnings, but Samuel made it beautiful, made it feel like the natural culmination of everything that had been building between them since the moment he had appeared at the stagecoach door. Afterward, lying in his arms in the big bed, Clara felt a sense of rightness she'd never experienced before. This was where she belonged, not in Boston trying to fit into a world that had no place for her, but here in Nevada with a man who saw her truly and loved her anyway. No regrets? Samuel asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. None. You? How could I regret the best thing that's ever happened to me? He kissed her hair. I love you, Clara Crawford. I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid of scaring you away. I love you too. The words felt natural, right? I think I started falling in love with you when you quoted Whitman to me. Samuel laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. I'll remember to quote poetry more often then. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time since her arrival in Nevada, Clara slept without nightmares, without anxiety about the future. She'd found her place, her home, her love. Winter deepened, but Clara no longer feared the cold or the isolation. She and Samuel were thoroughly, completely happy, still learning each other, but doing so with joy rather than uncertainty. They worked together during the day, Samuel teaching her more about ranch management, while Clara brought order and efficiency to the household. At night, they retreated to their bedroom, to the intimacy that grew deeper and more satisfying with each passing week. In January, Samuel took her to town for supplies and books. Clara met with the other ranch wives, women who welcomed her into their circle and shared advice about surviving the harsh winters. She felt herself becoming part of the community, no longer an outsider, but a resident, a neighbor, a friend. One afternoon, while Samuel was working on repairing a section of fence damaged by the heavy snows, Clara found a wooden box in the bottom of the wardrobe. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in feminine handwriting. She recognized her own letters immediately, the ones she'd sent Samuel during their correspondence. But there were others too. Samuel found her sitting on the bed, the letters spread around her, tears streaming down her face. Clara, what's wrong? He was at her side instantly, alarm clear in his voice. You kept them all, she said, holding up the stack of her letters. Everyone I sent you? Samuel relaxed slightly, settling beside her. Of course I did. They were precious to me, even before I met you. They were proof that somewhere out there was a woman who might understand me, might want the life I had to offer. But these others, Clara picked up a different stack. These aren't from me. No, those are letters from other women who answered my advertisement before you did. Clara's stomach clenched. She'd known intellectually that Samuel must have corresponded with other women, but seeing the evidence was different. Why did you keep them? Honestly, I'm not sure. I suppose part of me wanted to remember that I'd made the right choice. He took the letters from her gently and set them aside, then took her hands. Clara, I wrote to 6 women before you. 3 never responded after the first exchange. 2 seemed nice, but we had nothing in common. And then there was you. What made me different? Everything. Your first letter was honest in a way the others weren't. You didn't romanticize the West or pretend to be someone you weren't. You told me you were desperate and scared, but determined to make a new life. You told me about teaching, about losing your parents, about your real life, and in every letter after that, you showed me more of who you really were, not who you thought I wanted you to be. Clara wiped her eyes. I was afraid if I wasn't honest, you'd regret bringing me here. I could never regret you. Samuel pulled her close. But if it bothers you, I'll burn these letters. They don't matter anymore. No, Clara said. Keep them. They're part of your history, part of what led you to me. They sat together quietly, Clara leaning against Samuel's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She understood now that love wasn't just passion and romance. It was this, the quiet moments of understanding and acceptance, the willingness to be vulnerable with another person. I have something to tell you, Clara said after a while. I've been feeling strange lately, tired, a little sick in the mornings. Samuel pulled back to look at her, his eyes wide. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm not sure yet, but I think I might be pregnant. The joy that flooded his face was unmistakable. Really? Are you happy about it? Terrified, Clara admitted. But yes, happy. I never thought I'd have a family of my own, and now I have you and maybe a baby. It's overwhelming but wonderful. Samuel kissed her deeply. We should have Doc Harrison confirm it when we go to town next week. Agreed, but Samuel, if I am pregnant, I'm going to need help. I don't know anything about babies or childbirth. We'll figure it out together. Mrs. Peterson raised 6 children. I'm sure she'll help. And there are other women in the area who've been through it. Over the next months, Clara's pregnancy was confirmed and her body began to change. Samuel was attentive, almost overly so, constantly worried about her health and comfort. Clara found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, especially when he tried to prevent her from doing any physical work. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon, when he'd insisted she rest instead of helping with the garden. "I know, but I worry. Childbirth is dangerous, Clara. I lost my mother to fever, and the thought of losing you terrifies me." His honesty softened her frustration. She took his hand and placed it on her swelling belly. "I'm strong, and I'm careful. Doc Harrison says I'm healthy. You have to trust that I'll be fine." "I'm trying." He splayed his fingers over her stomach. "Is the baby moving yet?" "Not that I can feel. Doc says it'll be a few more weeks." As spring arrived, transforming the landscape just as Samuel had promised, Clara bloomed alongside the wildflowers. Her morning sickness faded, replaced by renewed energy. She threw herself into preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, organizing one of the spare bedrooms as a nursery. Samuel built a beautiful wooden cradle, working on it in the evenings by lamplight, his face intent with concentration. When he presented it to Clara, she cried at the craftsmanship and care evident in every joint and curve. "Our baby will sleep safe in this," he said, setting it in the nursery, "just like you sleep safe with me." The first time Clara felt the baby move, she was hanging laundry in the yard. The sensation was so strange, so wonderful, that she gasped aloud. Samuel came running from the barn, thinking something was wrong. "The baby!" Clara said, taking his hand and pressing it to her belly. "Can you feel it?" They stood together in the sunshine, waiting. Then it came again, a flutter against Samuel's palm, his face transformed with wonder. "That's our child," he whispered. "Our baby." "Our family," Clara corrected, and kissed him. Summer brought long days and hard work. Despite her pregnancy, Clara insisted on helping with the vegetable garden, on feeding chickens, on the dozen small tasks that kept a ranch running. Samuel had hired a hand to help with the heavier work, a young man named Tom, who was saving money to buy his own land. Clara liked Tom, appreciated his respectful manner, and his willingness to learn. He often ate meals with them, and Clara enjoyed the conversation, the way having another person around changed the dynamic of the ranch. One evening, Tom mentioned he was thinking of sending for a mail-order bride himself once he had his land. "It worked out well for Samuel," he said. "Seems like a good way for a man out here to find a wife." Clara and Samuel exchanged glances, both remembering the blizzard, the uncertainty, the risk they'd taken on each other. "It can work," Clara said carefully. "But you have to be honest in your letters. Don't promise what you can't deliver, and don't expect perfection. Marriage is work, even when you start from love. Especially when you start from necessity," Samuel added. "But if you're patient and kind, if you really try to understand each other, it can become something beautiful." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "I'll remember that." As Clara's due date approached, Samuel became increasingly protective. He refused to leave her alone, bringing Tom with him on any ranch work that took him far from the house. Clara understood his fear, but sometimes felt smothered by his constant attention. "Samuel, you have to live your life," she told him one afternoon, when he'd turned down an invitation to help a neighbor with a barn raising. "The baby's not coming for another 3 weeks. You can't stop everything. I'm not taking chances. What if something happens while I'm gone? Then Mrs. Peterson is only an hour away, and Tom can ride for her." Clara took his hand. "I know you're scared, but you can't protect me from everything. Some things we have to trust to fate." Reluctantly, Samuel agreed to attend the barn raising, though he made Tom promise to stay at the ranch and ride for help if needed. Clara spent the day peacefully, reading and resting, feeling the baby's strong kicks and dreaming about the future. When Samuel returned that evening, he found her in the rocking chair he had made, her hands on her belly, singing softly. He stood in the doorway, just watching, his heart so full it almost hurt. "I love you," he said. Clara looked up, smiling. "I love you too, and I'm fine, see? Nothing happened. I know, but I'm still glad to be home." The baby came 2 weeks later, in the early hours of an August morning. Clara woke to contractions, gentle at first, but growing stronger. Samuel sent Tom racing to town for Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Harrison, then stayed with Clara, holding her hand and trying not to panic. Mrs. Peterson arrived first, bustling and efficient, taking over the bedroom and giving Samuel tasks to keep him occupied. Doc Harrison came an hour later, examining Clara and pronouncing everything normal. "First babies take time," he said. "Could be hours yet. Samuel, why don't you wait downstairs?" "I'm staying," Samuel said firmly. "This is my wife, my child. I'm not leaving." Clara squeezed his hand gratefully. She'd been afraid he'd want to wait elsewhere, as many men did. But having him there made her feel braver. The labor was long and difficult. Clara had known it would hurt, but the reality was beyond anything she'd imagined. Samuel stayed by her side through all of it, letting her grip his hand until his fingers went numb, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. Finally, as afternoon sun slanted through the windows, the baby came, entering the world with a strong, angry cry. Doc Harrison held up the squalling infant, still covered in blood and vernix. "It's a boy," he announced. "A healthy boy." Clara sobbed with relief and joy as Mrs. Peterson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in her arms. He was tiny, red-faced, perfect. Samuel leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "He's beautiful," Samuel whispered. "You're both beautiful." Clara looked up at her husband, seeing the love and awe in his face. What should we name him? They'd discussed names, but never decided. Now, holding their son, Samuel said, "What about James, after my father?" "James Crawford." Clara tested it, then smiled. "It's perfect." Doc Harrison and Mrs. Peterson left them alone with their son. Samuel sat on the bed beside Clara, one arm around her shoulders, both of them staring in wonder at the tiny person they'd created. "I can't believe he's real," Samuel said. "That we made him." "We did. He's ours." Clara touched the baby's soft cheek. "We have a family now, Samuel. A real family. The family I always wanted." Samuel kissed her temple. "Thank you, Clara, for coming here, for taking a chance on me, for this. Thank you for riding into a blizzard to save me." They sat together as evening fell, learning their sons' faces and sounds, falling even more deeply in love with each other through their shared love for their child. Clara thought back to the frightened woman in the stagecoach, certain she was going to die, unable to imagine the happiness that was waiting just beyond the storm. Life with a baby was exhausting but joyful. James was a good baby, healthy and growing fast. Clara marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her, how fiercely she loved this tiny person. Samuel was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, rocking him to sleep, singing off-key lullabies, changing diapers without complaint. As autumn arrived and James reached 3 months old, Clara stood on the porch one morning, watching Samuel work in the corral with Tom, watching the mountains turn gold and red with changing aspens. She held James against her shoulder, breathing in his sweet baby smell, feeling contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was home, not the house or the land, but this feeling, this love, this family. She'd traveled 2,000 miles and survived a blizzard to find it, and it had been worth every terrifying moment. Samuel looked up from the corral and saw her watching. He waved, his smile bright even from a distance. Clara waved back, her heart full. That evening, after James was asleep in his cradle, Clara and Samuel sat by the fire, as they had so many nights before. Samuel pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Clara tilted her face up to kiss him. "I was thinking about the night we met, about you appearing at that stagecoach like some kind of guardian angel. I wasn't feeling very angelic. I was terrified I wouldn't reach you in time. But you did. You saved me." "We saved each other," Samuel corrected. "I was alone before you came, just going through the motions of living. You gave me purpose, Clara. You gave me everything." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, their bodies knowing each other perfectly now. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Clara thought about the future. She wanted more children, wanted to watch James grow up with brothers and sisters. She wanted to grow old here with Samuel, to build a legacy together. "I want to have more babies," she told Samuel. "Lots of them, if we're blessed." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "I want that too. I want this house full of children and laughter. I want to build something that lasts, something we can pass down to our grandchildren." "We will," Clara promised. "We have time." The years that followed were full of both hardship and joy. The ranch prospered under Samuel's careful management and Clara's organizational skills. They expanded the herd, bought more land, hired more help. The house that had seemed so large to Clara when she first arrived slowly filled with children. A daughter came 2 years after James, a tiny girl with Clara's green eyes and Samuel's dark hair. They named her Margaret after Clara's mother. Then another son, Robert, then twin girls, Alice and Anne. Each birth was easier than the last, each child a blessing that deepened the bonds of their family. Clara taught her children to read from the books in her library, taught them about the world beyond Cherry Creek. Samuel taught them to ride, to work hard, to take pride in what they built with their own hands. Together, they raised children who were confident and kind, who knew they were loved beyond measure. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Clara back to town, to the boarding house where she'd recovered from the blizzard. Mrs. Peterson was older now, moving slower, but still sharp as ever. "Look at you two," she said, pulling Clara into a hug. "Still so in love, it makes my teeth ache." "You were right," Clara told her. "That first day, you said I'd marry him. You knew before I did. I've been around long enough to recognize real love when I see it beginning." Mrs. Peterson patted her cheek. "You were good for each other from the start." That night, in the hotel room Samuel had rented, they made love and talked about the decade they had shared. Clara thought about how much she'd changed, from the frightened woman on the stagecoach to the confident mother and rancher's wife she'd become. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked. "Leaving Boston, everything you knew?" "Never, not once." Clara traced the lines of his face, marked now with years of sun and wind. "This is my life, Samuel. You and our children and this wild, beautiful place. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Even when the winters are brutal and the work is endless, even then," she kissed him deeply. "Especially then, because we face it together." More years passed. James grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Margaret became a teacher herself, working in the new school that had been built in Cherry Creek. The younger children were still growing, still learning, still filling the house with noise and chaos. Samuel's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around Clara's eyes, but their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared struggles and sweetened by shared triumphs. On a cold November evening, 20 years after Clara's arrival, they sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets, watching snow begin to fall. Inside, their children were gathered around the fire, the older ones telling stories to the younger. "Do you remember the blizzard?" Clara asked. "The one that brought me here? I remember every detail." Samuel pulled her closer. "The worst storm in 15 years, the driver said. "The best storm of my life." Clara looked up at the swirling snow. "It brought me to you. It brought us to each other." Samuel kissed her forehead. "And I'd ride through 1,000 blizzards to find you again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, hearing their children's laughter drift from inside. Clara thought about the terrified woman in that stagecoach, thinking she was going to die. She'd been wrong. She hadn't died that day. She'd been born, reborn into a life she never could have imagined, a life richer and fuller than anything she'd left behind. The snow fell harder, covering the ground in white, transforming the landscape. But Clara wasn't afraid of storms anymore. She had Samuel's arms around her, had her children safe and warm inside, had a home and a family, and a love that had survived every challenge. She'd been a mail-order bride who arrived during the worst blizzard, carried through the snow by a cowboy who became her whole world. It was a love story born from necessity and desperation, but it had become something transcendent, something eternal. As they finally rose to go inside, to join their children by the fire, Clara took one last look at the falling snow. Somewhere out there, maybe another stagecoach was trapped, another woman was frightened and alone. Clara sent up a silent prayer that she too would find her Samuel, her sanctuary, her home. But for now, Clara's storm was long over. She'd found her calm, her peace, her forever in the arms of the man who'd risked everything to save her. And as they closed the door against the wind and snow, sealing themselves in with warmth and light and love, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The house was full of noise and laughter as they entered, James arguing good-naturedly with Robert about something ranch-related, Margaret trying to teach the twins a new song, the youngest children begging for one more story before bed. Samuel looked at Clara, and she saw her own contentment reflected in his eyes. This was their legacy, built from a desperate gamble and a dangerous rescue, grown into something beautiful and lasting. Their children would grow up knowing they were loved, would build their own lives and families, would carry forward the lessons Samuel and Clara had learned together. Love wasn't always easy or romantic. Sometimes it was practical, built from shared work and mutual respect. But when that foundation was strong, when two people committed fully to each other, it could grow into something powerful enough to withstand any storm. Clara moved through her children to the kitchen, starting to prepare tea while Samuel settled into his chair by the fire. This was routine now, comfortable and familiar, but no less precious for being so. Every ordinary moment was a gift, every day together a blessing she'd never take for granted. Later, after the children were finally in bed, after the house had quieted, Clara and Samuel climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the master bedroom they had shared for 20 years. Samuel undressed slowly, his movements familiar, and Clara watched him with the same love and desire she'd felt that first night they'd truly come together. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, catching her watching him. "About how lucky I am. About how one storm, one moment of terror led to all of this." She gestured around the room, meaning not just the space, but everything it represented. "About how grateful I am that you rode out into that blizzard." Samuel crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm the lucky one, Clara. You could have been anyone, any woman answering an advertisement. But you were you, brave and smart and beautiful, and you chose to stay with me even when I gave you the chance to leave. Where else would I go? This is home. You're home." They kissed, soft and sweet, and climbed into bed together. Clara nestled against Samuel's side, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. This was her favorite part of the day. These quiet moments when it was just the two of them, no children needing attention, no work demanding to be done. "I love you," Samuel murmured into the darkness. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too. Always." They drifted to sleep holding each other, as they had for 20 years, as they would for the rest of their lives. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. But inside, the house was warm, the family was safe, and love endured. Clara's last thought before sleep took her was simple and profound. She was home. The end.